Welcome back to the Deep Dive. We've pulled together a fascinating stack of sources today that tells a really consistent story across a century of Russian art.
It does.
The path to becoming a recognized masterpiece, it seems, often starts with massive public scandal, institutional rejection, or just outright dismissal.
That's exactly right. Our material shows that these works weren't simply, artistic failures. They were more like seismic events. They generated these fierce polemics and intensely polar opinions the moment they debuted.
Oh, yeah.
The real insight here is how friction, that confrontation with established academic, political, or historical norms, is actually what created the lasting cultural canon we now recognize.
Okay, so let's unpack this. Our mission today is to dissect 5 specific examples. We're going to trace that line of controversy, looking at how each artist really challenged the existing rules.
And how these initially rejected canvases ultimately secured their immortal place. Often you'll see, thanks to the foresight and the buying power of one man, Pavel Tretyakov.
We start with historical legend, and we're going to end in pure chaotic modernism.
Let's do it.
We begin in 1863 with a work that caused an absolute firestorm at the Imperial Academy of Arts. It's Konstantin Flavitsky's Princess Tarakanova.
And the contemporary critic Stasov, he noted that some viewers praised it to the skies, while others were just, outraged by its unallowable nature.
So what generated all that heat? What was so unallowable?
Well, Flavitsky, who was a young graduate, he basically committed 2 sins at the same time. First, he chose a Russian historical subject, which was still, relatively rare.
Okay.
But second, and this was far more critical, he based the entire dramatic scene not on verifiable historical fact, which the Academy demanded, but on popular legend.
And the subject itself is gripping. I mean, it's high drama. The mysterious, self-proclaimed Princess Tarakanova, who claimed the Russian throne under Catherine II, dying during a terrible Petersburg flood, right there in the dungeon of the Peter and Paul fortress.
Right, but you're saying this flood death, it's all fictional. Precisely. The real princess did die in the fortress, but from tuberculosis. The whole drowning in the flood story was this powerful, persistent myth that came from popular novels and articles.
So Flavitsky chose narrative over fact.
He prioritized the drama. He was still rooted in the classical school of painting. He was a huge admirer of Karl Brylov, which is why he painted the heroine with this ideal face and figure and, luxurious dress.
But he dramatically contrasted that classical figure against this brutal, naturalistic prison setting. You can see the water already rising around her feet.
And that contrast is the entire hinge. The rigid academic hierarchy demanded a certain grandeur, a certain verifiable truth from its historical paintings. But that naturalistic element, the grim reality of the dungeon, was actually admired by the new realist painters, the Podvishniki, or the Wanderers.
So the very people fighting against the Academy's ideals.
Exactly. So the painting was controversial for being fiction, but then praised by the avant-garde for its realism. It was caught in the middle.
And this is where it gets really interesting, right? Where art connects directly to state policy. The state couldn't just ignore a work that basically suggests an innocent claimant to the throne was brutally killed by the empress.
Oh, the volatility was immediate. Emperor Alexander II himself stepped in. He issued an official correction.
Really? The emperor?
Yes. When the painting went to the Paris World Exhibition, he personally ordered the catalog entry changed. The title became The Legendary Death of Princess Tarakanova in the Dungeon.
Wow.
And they added an explicit note saying the painting follows the plot of a novel and has no relation to actual reality.
So they were doing damage control on an international stage.
Yeah.
Trying to officially correct the record. But I mean, once a legend like that takes root in art, does a correction even matter?
It rarely does. And Tretyakov knew that. He saw the power of it immediately, calling it an absolute masterpiece of the Russian school.
Okay, so Tretyakov, the collector we know for his financial patience, did he get involved in the negotiation for it?
Absolutely. Slavitsky asked for 5,000 silver rubles. Tretyakov, always, economical, offered only 3,000. The negotiation stalled.
And
then soon after, Slavitsky died of tuberculosis, that dark symmetry with the real princess we mentioned.
So wait, Tretyakov held out until the artist was dead. Was this just his standard practice or a unique instance of that patience paying off?
It was certainly strategic. The artist's heirs then demanded 18,000 rubles, which Tretyakov just refused, but he waited. When the work came back unsold from Paris, Tretyakov swooped in and purchased it for 4,000 rubles.
So well below the original asking price.
And the acquisition was crucial. Once it was in the Tretyakov gallery, the painting was kind of divorced from that academic debate over fact versus fiction.
I see.
Instead, it became a commentary on state power.
It became this iconic image of the victims of state arbitrariness.
Yes. The sources say that future revolutionary groups actually stood before Princess Tarakanova and also Rapin's Ivan the Terrible and his son Ivan to take these solemn anti-establishment oaths.
So the powerful story completely, totally trumped the historical correction. Which leaves a question for you, the listener. When does a powerful narrative become more culturally potent than the actual facts? This painting is a definitive answer. Okay, let's transition now. If Flavitsky challenged historical fact with fiction, our next artists questioned the entire form of painting itself.
Demanding that art could use a kind of poetic, conditional language instead of strict realism.
And that brings us to Viktor Vaznetsov's After the Battle of Igor Sviatoslavich from 1880.
Right. So Vaznetsov, who up to that point had been known as a successful genre painter, painting the humorous, tangible truth of life, he unveiled this work at the 8th Itinerant Exhibition, and it was a crushing failure. He was dismayed that everyone just turned their backs on it.
But why? I mean, why such a fierce reaction to a historical scene? It looks so solemn and dramatic, these dead warriors on the battlefield.
Because the critics, especially those aligned with the realist tradition, they demanded archaeological, almost photographic precision in historical painting. They looked at Vaznetsov's work, and they just didn't see the truth of life.
They saw something else.
They dismissed the entire canvas as mystical, theatrical, and unnatural. But the most stinging insult was calling it a naturemort.
A still life. I mean, that sounds deeply insulting when you're depicting a heroic battlefield.
It was intended to be. Calling it a still life implied the scene of fallen heroes was inert, that it lacked narrative or spiritual life. Just a mere arrangement of objects, reducing heroic sacrifice to a collection of dead props.
What the critics missed, or maybe refused to accept, was that the subject wasn't a historical event. It was an ancient poem, the tale of Igor's campaign.
Exactly. Vaznetsov wasn't illustrating a textbook. He was trying to paint a song or a visual mood. It was a lament. The whole thing used this poetic, conditional language, focusing on symbol and atmosphere over forensic detail.
And amidst all that rejection, there was this high-stakes intrigue over who would buy it.
Right, and that's where Tretyakov's decisiveness comes in again. Grand Duke Vladimir Alexandrovich was showing keen interest. Repin even wrote to Tretyakov about it.
What did he say?
He said, the Grand Duke wants to buy, his mount isn't stupid, and the thing is very interesting, national.
So, a little bit of pressure.
A little bit. But Tretyakov, as usual, acted fastest. He secured the work directly from the exhibition floor for 5,000 silver rubles, preventing it from going into the imperial collection.
And that purchase legitimized the work.
It did. And over time, that poetic language found full acceptance. It basically paved the way for Vaznetsov's entire famous series of mythological and fairy tale paintings, essentially forming the visual blueprint for ancient Rus.
That challenge to realism leads us beautifully into our next case, Nikolai Yaroshenko's The Prisoners from 1881. This work looks like pure realism, but it was rejected for having too much social commentary.
The controversy here stemmed from what the critics called the painting's secret tendentiousness. Yaroshenko showed this moving, everyday scene of prisoners being loaded into a wagon.
And viewers felt sympathy.
They did, but critics were extremely irritated by what they saw as a hidden political message. They just dismissed the work as a newspaper article.
So the illusion of reality was too effective. It made the social critique undeniable. I understand the canvas was hung intentionally low, wasn't it?
It was. To create this sense that you, the viewer, were standing right there on the platform next to the departing wagon.
That illusion of presence.
It was a deliberate mechanism to force the viewer's empathy, making the political point inescapable. But Yaroshenko, he was known for his portraits of social heroes of the time, and he defended his choices, saying his goal was to show more than just a daily scene.
So the realism was a kind of Trojan horse for symbolism.
Precisely. This was a coded allegory of Russian society suffering under repression. You see a group portrait of society, the soldier, the peasant, the worker, and then the central figure, the prison Madonna. And if you look closely, she's covered with a classical veil, not a typical peasant scarf. And the pigeons nearby were read as a symbol of the Holy Spirit. This wasn't just social realism, it was spiritual and political coding.
The sources show this was his intention from the start. He originally wanted to name the painting What Men Live By, after a story by Tolstoy.
Which just confirms it. The symbolic meaning was always paramount, despite that surface appearance of pure realism.
Okay, now we move toward the definitive style clash at the turn of the century. The rejection was less about history and more about, well, institutional defense against modernism itself.
Yes. We have to talk about Mikhail Vrubel's rejected panels from the 1896 Nizhny Novgorod exhibition.
This is a perfect example of the Academy fighting to maintain its entire structure of official imperial taste.
It is. The patron, a man named Sava Mamontov, hired the then little-known Vrubel to fill 2 huge empty spaces in the academic art pavilion with these enormous panels.
And the scale alone is just daunting. Mykola Selyanovich, an ancient Russian hero, and Princess Dream, which was inspired by a hugely popular French play, La Princesse Lointaine.
A play so ubiquitous that, at the time, it even inspired commercial products, perfume and chocolate.
So everyone knew the story. But Vrubel's technique, that was the true act of rebellion.
Absolutely. He worked publicly on scaffolding, and he used this mixture of oil paints and an additive kerosene to thin the mixture and create a matte, mosaic-like finish.
Which would have looked completely alien to the academic eye.
This broken, rough texture was utterly antithetical to the smooth, varnished, finished perfection demanded by academic tradition. His figures were described as flying figures of modern art.
So what was the mechanism for rejection here? Mamontov had commissioned them.
The Academic Council vetoed the works. They saw the preliminary sketches and forced the removal of the nearly finished panels. This was the imperial establishment basically saying, this is not art, this is an aesthetic contagion.
But Mamontov was a master of publicity.
Oh, he was brilliant. He immediately built a new separate pavilion right outside the main exhibition space.
And put up that amazing sign, Vrubel's panels rejected by the Academy of Arts.
Exactly. That sign became the main draw. Everyone wanted to see the art that the highest authorities had deemed unfit for public viewing.
But even with all that interest, the establishment consensus was still negative.
Very negative. Tsar Nicholas II disliked the works, and so did influential critics like Maxim Gorky.
And the fate of these colossal panels is legendary. They were stored in Mamontov's theater, then another opera house, and then they just vanished after the revolution. Where did they end up?
Well, Mykola Selyanovich is still lost. We have no idea where it is. But Princess Dream was dramatically rediscovered in 1956 in a Bolshoi theater warehouse.
Oh.
It had been barbarically folded and was heavily cracked, just stored like useless stage scenery. It was so enormous that when the curators finally got it, they had to unroll the canvas in the square outside the theater before they could even move it.
That truly highlights how acceptance sometimes takes half a century. And now it's housed in a specially constructed hall in the reconstructed Tretyakov.
Built just to accommodate this gigantic, once-rejected piece of art, the ultimate validation for a work that defied every institutional rule. And that defiance brings us to our final and maybe most furious example of confrontation, Philip Malavin's Whirlwind from 1906.
Malavin was a peasant who studied under Rebin and rose fast, but always controversially. His work Laughter, which the Academy rejected, won gold at the Paris World Exhibition.
But with Whirlwind, which debuted at the Miraskustva exhibition, he pushed technique into what felt like pure coloristic chaos.
And the reaction was just completely polarized. It was a painting defined by its lack of clarity.
Stasov, who was once the champion of realism, called Malyavin a maniac. He called the painting a colorful chaos that was hard work to view. He complained you couldn't distinguish figures from limbs in the explosive color.
But Rapin, his former teacher, called him a genius. And hilariously, he used the exact same negative terms to praise it. He called it chaos, a mess of paint with brushstrokes that sound like trumpets.
It really seems the threshold for what constituted mess versus masterpiece was the real fight here. It was a fight over paint itself.
And the criticism got personal?
Very. The journalist Buranin's critique was the harshest. He called Malavin an oaf who paints drunk peasant women for the intelligentsia rabble. They saw no beauty, only vulgarity and confusion.
The sources mention a stark difference between the cheerful initial sketch of these dashing young women in Ryazan and the intense, almost abstract final work. The paint seems incandescent and undried. Why was that so shocking?
Malyavin used paint not to describe form precisely, but to convey raw energy. The brushstrokes are thick, violent, and highly visible. From a distance, the overwhelming red color and the dynamic strokes made the whole thing look like a monster or giant opening flowers, and it caused genuine anxiety in viewers.
This was painting as pure material confrontation.
It really was. Yet, validation was swift on the side of the future. The Tretyakov Council and Tretyakov's own daughter, Alexandra Butina, immediately championed the work. They proclaimed Malovin a genius.
And it was acquired in 1906, the same year Malovin, incredibly, became an academician.
That painting, with its chaotic, overwhelming color, took its place among the 19th century masters in the gallery, symbolizing the definitive arrival of the 20th century's aesthetic concerns.
What a profound journey. We've seen 5 cases, from Flavitsky using legend to override history, to Vaznetsov using poetic language to override realism, all the way to Malovin using chaotic color to override clarity. The common thread in all these acquisitions is a confrontation with established taste, whether that taste was academic dogma, historical necessity, or political sensitivity.
And Tretyakov's consistent, brave role as the buyer is just crucial. He often waited for the right price, sure, but he never hesitated to acquire the controversial work. He ensured that what was violently rejected by the Academy or criticized by the public became part of the national canon.
Forcing Russian art to redefine itself.
Exactly. These weren't just canvases, they were cultural flashpoints.
We've seen that sometimes legend triumphs over history and chaos triumphs over clarity. We often equate immediate understanding with genuine quality. So, if controversy and initial rejection are the true engines of lasting influence, here's an important question for you to mull over. What art, what technology, or what idea that is being savagely criticized and dismissed today will we view as the seminal, defining masterpiece of the 21st century tomorrow?